So as we grow up and as we go through life, as kids especially, we like to play one game with kids all the time, right? Hide and seek. And it doesn't matter what age they are. You start when they're young and you play peekaboo, right? That's a form of hide and seek. And then you start to play the game. And really, as you get older, hide and seek just looks a little bit different, right? Some of you go seek things with a gun that are hiding. And it's just a big game of hide and seek, right? And but hide and seek is kind of a fun way. As a youth pastor, we would play all kinds of variations of hide and seek and see what could happen. Maybe, typically it's one person goes hides, right, and everybody counts, and then they go look for that person. In the youth group, a lot of times the kids would love to play a game called Sardines, where you would go and the one person would go hide, and then everyone would count, and then if you found the person who was hiding, you would hide with them. And like sardines in a can, you would try to hide as best you can with them and squeeze into that spot. Even last month when I was at teen camp, they still play a game there called Counselor Hunt, right? They have all the kids stay in a room, and they have a group of counselors, 10 to 15 of them, that go and they hide around the campground, and then the kids are unleashed to go out, wave after wave of kids, go to look for these adults who are hiding. And so we all kind of enjoy, in a sense, a form of hide and seek. The concept of seeking something that is hiding is something that is just part of who we are and part of what we like to do. And then when you find that thing that is hidden, find that person that is hidden, then there's just a sense of kind of joy and relief that comes over your life as you find that. And we see that the game of hide and seek, really, it started all the way back at the beginning of creation. We see in Genesis chapter 1 that God created the heavens and the earth, and He created everything in it. And then He created Adam and Eve. And then He said, Adam and Eve, you can do anything you want, but eat from that one tree, right? You can't eat from that tree, and we'll be okay. And what do? They disobey God. They eat from the tree. And then what happens? Their eyes are open to a little bit more of the world than they expected. And so then God, who has naturally come to them every day and walked with them and talked with them and hung out with them, God naturally comes to find them that day, and He can't find them because now that their eyes have been opened, they're playing hide and seek with God. And we see that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. It says, the man and his wife hid themselves from the Lord God in the middle of the garden's trees. Their response to disobeying God was to hide. And so we've been playing hide and seek with God. Humanity has been playing hide and seek with God ever since, because of that sense of inside of us that we disobeyed God, that there's something that separates us from God. And we've been separated, so we've been kind of playing hide and seek with God as we've been hiding from Him, and God has been seeking. We've spent a lot of time this summer. We've spent 11 weeks, this is the 12th week, looking at the minor prophets. We've been looking at the stories of the minor prophets as the men of God have been called to come and share messages with God's people. And remember, they're called the minor prophets not because they were short, small people, but because they had short messages. And so they came and they had a little bit smaller messages, and so they were booked. And it's the last 12 books of the Old Testament is where we've been all summer. And today we find ourselves at the end of that. We find ourselves in the book of Malachi. And much like all the other prophets, we find that Malachi has a very simple message to the people. He has a message that talks about the fact that they have hidden themselves from God, and that God is still seeking them and still seeking to be in relationship with them. We see that Malachi comes along, and he is the final of the prophets. And at this time, God speaks through him, and then we get the end of the Old Testament. And then we get 400 years of God being quiet before John the Baptist comes and God starts to speak again. And so Malachi is kind of that transition prophet, right? He's reminding them of the story of the Old Testament. The fact that we disobeyed God and we hid from God. And that in our sin we hide from God and we're separated from Him. But even still, God seeks us. God designed us to be in special relationship with Him. God designed us to interact with Him and journey through this life with Him. God designed us to be there, and because of disobedience, we caused separation. We caused a sense of hiding. And so we see this whole story kind of played out. That because of the consequences of sin, there is that separation. Because we chose wrong and because we choose not to follow God, then we're separated from God. There's a consequence to the disobedience. One of the times when we were playing sardines here at the church, we were playing in the back hall, and I said, okay, somebody went and hid, and then I let everyone loose to go and run and hide and look for that person. And one of the young ladies decided that she was going to play outside the bounds of the church, of the way we had set it up, right? There were certain rooms that were unlocked that they could go into and certain doors that were locked. And then there were certain doors that we're not hiding in the bathrooms, we're not hiding in these rooms, right? And she goes down the hall checking it, and she finds that the door to the baptistry is unlocked. Oh, it's unlocked. I must be able to go in there. And so she goes in there, not knowing there's a big giant tub in there. She goes in there looking for whoever's hiding. That's the door you're not supposed to go into. That is not the way to go. I don't know why it's unlocked. It's not supposed to be. But she goes in there and she falls right into the tub. Fortunately, she didn't hurt herself. But she learned right there was a consequence for her making a poor choice. And then she didn't go back in that room again. But that's what we have. We as humans have to learn those lessons the hard way, don't we? That we have to learn that when we disobey God, there are consequences. And so God says there are consequences for disobeying me. And he kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden. And he says, all right, now you have to work the land. Now you have to deal with sickness. Now you have to deal with weather. Now you have to deal with the animals in a more wild sense. Now you have to, and the list goes on and on. But even though there was a consequence and they had to do all that, God still sought out. He was still seeking to reconnect with us. He still wanted to have a special relationship with humans. And so he went and he did things along the way. And we look in the Old Testament. First, we see that he looked throughout all the land and he finally found a man who was holy enough and righteous enough. He found a man named Abram. And he went to Abram and his wife Sarah, and they were living in the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, it says. And if you don't know where that is, that's in kind of modern day Iraq, kind of that area of the land. There are still a group of people that live in Iraq that are called the Chaldeans. But God went to Abram and he said, Abram, I have something special for you. If you will do this, then I will connect with you in a new personal way. I have sought you out and I have found you. And now we can connect together. And so God promises Abram in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. He says, leave your land, your family, and your father's household for the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation and will bless you. I will make your name respected and you will be a blessing. And so God changes his name from Abram to Abraham. Abraham meaning exalted father, as a lasting kind of reminder. And so God says, I will connect with you, Abraham. And Abraham does it. He doesn't do it perfectly. He makes some mistakes just like we do. But he does it. And then Abraham has a son, right? A son named Isaac. And then Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. And God seeks a special relationship with them. And Esau says, no, I don't want anything to do with this God. But Jacob, after a wrestling match, decides, okay, I will give in. And I will follow God. And so God then says, Jacob, your name now is going to be Israel. And Israel is now going to have 12 sons. And the 12 sons are the 12 tribes of Israel, my chosen people. And so God kept his promise to Abraham throughout the Old Testament, as we see God reaching out to the Israelites, as we see God protecting them and guiding them, as we see that he tries to interact with them, and we also see that they continue to hide from him. He seeks them, and they continue to hide, and they continue to look for ways of the world. And they go through all that time of back and forth. And God, even though they keep disobeying, God continues to look. God continues to seek because he wants that special relationship. And you can read in the Old Testament, and many of you have, and we read all those stories to see how that hide-and-seek game is played out. But as we get into Malachi chapter 1, we find a very special and very important verse that starts the whole thing. And so the first 5 verses is what I'm going to read, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. Malachi 1, verses 1 through 5 says, a pronouncement, the Lord's word to Israel through Malachi. I have loved you, says the Lord, but you say, how have you loved us? Wasn't Esau Jacob's brother, says the Lord? I loved Jacob, but I rejected Esau. I turned Esau's mountains into desolation, his inheritance into a wilderness for jackals. Edom may say, we are beaten down, but we will rebuild the ruins. But the Lord of heavenly forces proclaims, they may build, but I will tear them down. They will call themselves a wicked territory, the people against whom the Lord rages forever. Your eyes will see it, and you will say, may the Lord be great beyond the borders of Israel. So Malachi begins his prophecy here, and you were challenged to read Malachi this last week and to see where he goes from there. But he begins with a great declaration from God to the people. The declaration says that God says, I have loved you. I have loved my people. A few weeks ago, we studied the minor prophet Obadiah, right? At the end of July, we were looking at Obadiah. Obadiah was God's messenger to the Edomites. And remember, we talked about how the Edomites were descendants of Esau. And it goes all the way back to Jacob, right? It goes all the way back to their fighting as brothers. And it still continues to this very day. But it's interesting that they are considered outcasts of Israel. They're considered They were fighting like brothers all these years, and right now, as Israel's going through a hard time, they're trying to compare themselves to Esau. They're trying to compare themselves to what the Edomites went through and said, God, isn't that going to happen to us? And instead, they miss the message there at the very beginning of the story. They miss the message that says, I have loved you. They miss the promise that comes with that God is seeking us out, and he says, I have loved you. And what they've done is they've done what we do a lot, is that we get so caught up in all the things going on around us, we get so caught up in the ups and the downs of life that we forget that God is there. We forget that God has loved us and provided for us. We forget the ways that he has healed us in the past. That we just look around us and go, hey, all this stuff is going wrong, God. All this stuff is going bad. All this stuff is going the wrong way. And so we ask the same question that they asked. How have you loved us? See, during the time of Malachi, the Israelites had been back from exile for about 125 years. The temple had been rebuilt for about 100 years at this time. And what they were doing was they were looking around at the things that they didn't have. They were looking around at the things that weren't going right for them. The rebuilt temple was good, but it wasn't as good as Solomon's temple. It wasn't as glorious as it once was. They looked around and they said, there's only 100,000 of us left. There's only 100,000 Israelites here. How can we defend ourselves? How can we do all the work we need to do? How can we have all the systems in place we need to have with only that amount of people around? They were, of course, at this time under the rule of the Persian king and his appointed governor, so they weren't even in charge of themselves and what they could do. They had no army to protect themselves. And on top of all that, their area was in a time of great drought. And so it was hard to farm and ranch and do all the things they needed to live every day. And so they kept asking the question, you say you love us, but how have you loved us? They have forgotten the ways that God was seeking them out and seeking them out all the way through their history back to Abraham. They forget about the ways that God provided and took care of them. And again, I think it's something that we sometimes do. I think it's something that we think the question, what have you done for us lately? And we forget how God has taken care of us in the past and provided for us. We ask the question, how have you loved us? Because it's not evident right in front of me right this moment. And we forget that there is a God who has been seeking us out from the very beginning. A God who has loved us from the very beginning. A God who has looked all over the place. And it's not God's fault that we don't see him. It's not God's fault that we say, how have you loved us? It's not God's fault because God has been trying and God has been reaching out. And it's the fact that we have kind of blended in too much when it comes to being found. And that's one of the things that we see in Malachi. If you read the rest of Malachi, you see the back and forth between God's people and God. And he talks about how they look too much like those around them. That they look too much like their surroundings and like the people that they are living around. And they're worshiping the false gods. And they're living in sin. And they're doing all these things. And we've talked about that with all the other prophets as well. They've done so much that God is seeking them, but they're not open to God finding them. At teen camp this last year, we played that counselor hunt, that hide and seek game. And as they got ready to send the counselors out, they announced, hey, there are 3 counselors here who have not been found in 4 years. Okay? They're out there somewhere still. No, just kidding. They came back at the end of the game. But one was our district superintendent, Bob Skinner. He's there, and I don't know where he hides, but he hides somewhere, and he hasn't been found in a couple years. And why? Because especially the 2 of the guys, the other one was Pastor Jared Hunley from Evanston, Wyoming. And these 2, they dress up in all black, and they're putting mud on their face, and they're camouflaging themselves all the best they can, and they're able to sit quietly for a little while, right? Many of us can't do that. But they have blended in with wherever it is they go to hide. And so they haven't been found. And I imagine that's kind of what God is saying through Malachi, that he is saying, I am seeking you, I am coming and looking for you, but you have hidden yourself so well, you've blended yourself in so much with the ways of the world that I can't find you. That I just can't see where you're at. And so God gives us this challenge through Malachi. He says, I love you. And really, if we look at this translation, Malachi 1 verse 2, it says, I have loved you. And if you look in some other translations, your translations may have a few extra words added on, where it says, I will always love you. That there is a God who has always sought you. There is a God who is constantly seeking to connect with you. He wants to have that special relationship with you. He wants to interact with you. He wants to provide and protect you. He wants to journey through this life with you. But you are hidden. You have hidden and blended yourself in so much that you are feeling the effects of the world around you and you're not sure what to do next. And God says, just show me where you are. And when I find you, I will help you. I will lift you up. I will be there with you. We're reminded that as we read the Old Testament, it's not just something that is our past and we are to get rid of because we're not Jewish. It's part of our Christian story. That whole story that started in the Old Testament, Malachi is kind of the hinge piece into the New Testament, right? And that hinge piece in where God says, I am seeking you, and not only am I seeking you and looking all around the land, but I am now sending my son to you. I am sending my son to walk the land, to show you what it means to follow me, to live the life that I have called you to live, to be the people I've called you to be. I send my son to you, and not only have I sent him to you, but he'll die for you. He'll pay the price that he didn't owe and that you couldn't pay, so that we can be reconnected, so that we can have that joy of being found by the God who loves us for who we are, because he created us this way. We see 3 stories in the New Testament that Jesus tells, 3 parables that Jesus talks about when it comes to something that is lost, right? The very first story is the one of the shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away, one of them gets lost, and he leaves it behind and he goes searching for it. And when he finds it, he kills it and leaves it there. No, he picks it up and he carries it back to where it belongs. And then he has a barbecue. It still blows my mind. But we'll get to that in a moment. The second story is about a woman who has 10 coins, right? And she loses 1 coin. And she cleans her whole house, turns on all the lights, sweeps under all the carpets and all the the furniture and stuff. And she looks all over and she finds the one coin finally. And the third one is about a son who wanders away from his family, who says, I can do better than this. So Father, give me my inheritance and let me go live my life. And he goes away. He's lost. And then he comes to his senses. And he says, you know what? Life was better with my father. And so he goes back to his father. All three cases, something is lost. And even in the prodigal son, the father doesn't go to the city to look for him, but the father we know is sitting on his porch watching and waiting for his son to return. There's still that look and that anticipation of finding what was lost. All three of them are an illustration to us of how God seeks us, how he looks for us, how he comes after us, and then what happens after he finds us. Just like when you're playing hide and seek with kids, and the kids finally get a chance to win, and they get a chance to find you, and there's great joy and squealing in their voices. There is joy and celebration with God when he finds you, when he celebrates that you have been found, that now we can reconnect, and now we can start to live the life that I've called you to live. And so we have a God who seeks us out. No matter where you're at today, no matter what you have going on, no matter how well you think you're hiding from God, God is still seeking you and still wants to be in a relationship with you. And even though things seem to be crazy and hard around us and frustrating around us, he is still at work. He is still seeking. He is still providing, and he's still helping. That this same God that we look at the Old Testament, we look at the New Testament, is the same God who then, after the New Testament, for generations now, has been at work still in his church. And that even if we want to connect it 90 years, he's been seeking people through the Kalispell First Church of the Nazarene, so that you could be at this place and you could be a part of this church family, to be found by God, to experience his love and experience that relationship that he created for you to have. This same God that Adam and Eve hid from in Genesis chapter 3 still seeks us out. And it's the same God all the way through the Bible and all the way to us today, who still loves you and who wants to forgive you and wants to journey through this life with you. So as we go into our reflection time this morning, we're going to sing that song, Same God, that we've sung quite a few times. But it's that history in the song. It's that reminder that the God of Moses and the God of David and the God of Mary, that it's the same God that sends his Son now to be with us, that he has sought us, and we don't have to hide anymore. We can be found, and we can be loved and accepted. That's the story that we find in Malachi, and that's the story that we find through the entire Bible, and that's the story we've been teaching in the Church of the Nazarene for 90 years here in Kalispell. Please stand as we sing this song together. If you need some time to come and pray and talk to God about being found and what that may look like, feel free to come and kneel at these altars and pray for a little bit if you need to. I will close our time in prayer when the song is over.